explore the stories of the 15 most notorious serial killers who committed horrible crimes. Number 15. Delphine LaLaurie. Madame Delphine LaLaurie was a lady of American high society born around 1775 in New Orleans into a wealthy family. In 1825 and 1832, she had a two-story mansion built at 1140 Royal Street, where she lived with her husband, two daughters, and enslaved people. However, between 1831 and 1834, LaLaurie tortured and mistreated the slaves, and at least 12 of them died under her care. The crimes came to light in April 1834 when a fire broke out in LaLaurie's residence, revealing the horrifying mutilations and tortures. Bystanders found 7 enslaved individuals mutilated and suspended in the rooms. LaLaurie had a sadistic vein and was known for her cruel treatment of the enslaved. Despite publicly caring for their health, she was also a wealthy woman and a prominent member of New Orleans society. Rumors surrounding the discovery of the enslaved individuals have clouded the facts over the years, but some details remain true. Locals found the slaves in the attic, and they had been tortured. Unsubstantiated reports from eyewitnesses claim that at least 7 slaves were beaten, bruised, and bloodied almost to the point of losing their lives. Although LaLaurie and her husband fled New Orleans after the fire, it is unclear what became of her afterward. Despite a commemorative plaque and the house being a popular tourist attraction, the location of LaLaurie's final resting place remains a mystery. Number 14. Robert Berdella. Also known as the Kansas City Butcher, Robert Berdella was an American serial killer who operated in Kansas City during the 1980s. Berdella was a sadistic criminal known for ending the lives of at least 6 men between 1984 and 1987 using brutal torture methods. He often targeted young Caucasians working in the sex industry or those known to him. Once in his house, he drugged them with alcohol, sedatives, or animal tranquilizers, then restrained them to a basement bed with piano wire. Over several days or weeks, he tortured his victims in various ways, including electric shocks, blows with various instruments, and sodomy. He also applied window putty to their ears, bleached their eyes, poured cleaner into their vocal cords, and pierced their eyes. He documented the process with a camera and kept detailed records before ending their lives, usually with a plastic bag. After their deaths, he dismembered the corpses and left them in garbage bags for the trash collectors. Sometimes, he kept parts of the bodies, wallets, and identification documents as trophies. In March 1988, Berdella kidnapped his last victim, Chris Bryson, and imprisoned him in his basement, similar to his previous victims. While Berdella was already out working, Bryson dared to escape by jumping from a second-floor window. Berdella died on October 8, 1992, of a heart attack while serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 13. Amelia Dyer. Amelia Dyer is considered one of the most notorious killers in British history. She operated as a baby farmer during the Victorian era, a practice that was common at the time. Baby farmers would adopt unwanted children for a fee, promising that the children would be well cared for. In reality, many were mistreated and even murdered. Dyer, who had studied nursing and obstetrics, assured her clients that the children in her care would have a safe and loving home. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. Dyer allowed the children to die from starvation and neglect, and when that wasn't enough, she resorted to giving them Godfrey's cordial, a syrup mixed with opium that would calm them while they suffered from starvation. Over time, she even moved on to faster methods of murder solely to increase her profits. It wasn't until the body of a baby was found and traced back to one of Dyer's many aliases, Mrs. Thomas, that authorities began to investigate her. When they searched her residence, the overwhelming smell of decomposing human flesh was evident. Although no corpses were found, Dyer admitted to committing only one murder. Experts believe she may have killed between 200 and 400 children, according to the timeline of her activities. Amelia Dyer was finally hanged for her crimes on June 10, 1896. Despite being convicted of only one murder, her actions represent a dark period in British history. Number 12. Fritz Honka. Friedrich Paul Fritz Honka was a German serial killer who operated in Hamburg's red light district in the early 1970s. He was responsible for the deaths of at least 4 women, all of whom were sex workers. Honka worked as a night watchman for Shell, and his crimes occurred between 1970 and 1975. Honka's modus operandi involved strangling his victims, dismembering them, and hiding them in his apartment or attic. He did this with all of his victims, 3 of whose disappearances were not reported to the police. When other tenants reported unpleasant odors coming from Honka's apartment, he used pine-scented perfume blocks to mask the smell. Honka's victims were explicitly chosen in the red light district where he frequented bars and brothels. His targets were women who refused to engage in sexual relations with him or were not passionate enough. During sexual encounters, Honka had a history of failed marriages due to excessive alcohol consumption, and when he was very drunk, he would unleash his aggression on women. He had a strabismus and a speech defect that made him stand out. To get rid of the stench, Honka set his apartment on fire, but firefighters discovered mummified remains among the ashes and called the police. Initially, he confessed to the murders, but later he recanted, claiming he couldn't remember anything. He told the court that he had ended the lives of his victims because they mocked his preference for oral sex over heterosexual intercourse. Honka was found guilty of 1 murder charge and 3 counts of involuntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 15 years in a psychiatric hospital due to his chronic alcohol abuse, and his diminished mental capacity was considered a mitigating factor. He was released from prison in 1993 and spent his last years in a nursing home under the name Peter Jensen. He died in a Hamburg hospital on October 19, 1998. Number 11. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was a U.S. serial killer who committed heinous crimes in the 1970s. The last member of Bundy's defense team, lawyer Polly Nelson, called him the very definition of heartless evil. He kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and ended the lives of many young women and girls, eventually confessing to 30 murders committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. However, the number of its victims may be significantly older. Bundy had a charming personality and was physically attractive. He used his favor to gain the trust of his victims. In public places, he approached women pretending to need help or pretending to be an authority figure, deceiving them to be taken away. He knocked them out and took them to another place to sexually assault them before taking their lives. Bundy would often return to the bodies of his victims to perform sexual acts. He kept the heads of at least 12 of his victims as souvenirs in his apartment. Bundy was arrested and imprisoned in Utah for aggravated and attempted kidnapping and criminal assault, becoming suspected of many homicides in several states and accused of murder in Colorado. Bundy escaped 2 times and committed new assaults in Florida, including 3 murders before being recaptured. He received 3 death sentences in 2 trials for the Florida homicides and was executed in Florida State Prison in Rayford in January. Number 10. Randy Kraft. Also known as the Scorecard Killer, he was a serial offender and sexual predator whose primary targets were young Caucasian men and teenagers ranging from late adolescence to mid-20s. He often picked up his victims from bars, hitchhikers, or runaways. Kraft's crimes took place in California during the 1970s and 1980s, with his victims among the numerous corpses found near highways. Initially believed to be the work of a single serial killer dubbed the Freeway Killer, it was later discovered that Kraft was one of 3 culprits, the others being William Bonin and Patrick Kearney. Kraft's modus operandi included biting his victims and inserting objects. Many of his victims were also found barefoot, leading some to suspect a foot fetish. Kraft was arrested in May 1983 by the California Highway Patrol for driving under the influence. A deceased man, Terry Gambrell, was found in the back seat of Kraft's car. Subsequent investigations revealed the presence of tranquilizers, medications, and photos of young men. Further evidence was found in Kraft's house, including his scorecard, where his victims were listed with strange nicknames related to their location or personal habits. He was charged with 16 murders, including that of Terry Gambrell, and was convicted of multiple counts. Kraft is currently serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Kraft was found guilty of all charges, as well as some related to sodomy and torture. He was initially sentenced to death, but the sentence was confirmed in 2000, and he is currently serving his term on San Quentin's death row. Number 9. Edmund Kemper. Edmund Kemper was a U.S. serial killer who murdered 10 people, including his grandparents and mother. At 15, Kemper killed his grandparents because he wanted to know what it felt like. Released at 21, he began picking up hitchhiking women in his car, equipped with tools for his murderous desires. Initially letting them go, he soon started killing them. His first victims were 2 Fresno State students. Kemper had intimate relations with them after taking their lives. Continuing his spree, he attacked 4 more women and disposed of their body parts in various locations, earning him the nickname Coed Butcher. In April 1973, Kemper killed his mother and her friend Sally Hallett after an unpleasant exchange. He attacked his mother with a hammer and dismembered her body as he had done with his other victims. Kemper hid his mother's body parts and called her friend, inviting her to the house before taking her life. Kemper was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder, went to trial in October 1973, and was found guilty on all charges, sentenced to 8 concurrent life terms. When asked about his punishment, Kemper said he should be tortured to death. He is currently serving his sentence at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville. Number 8. Richard Cottingham. Richard Cottingham operated in New York and New Jersey from 1967 to 1981. He was nicknamed the Torso Killer for his gruesome custom of dismembering his victims, leaving only their torsos. One of his most heinous crimes consisted of dismembering 2 prostitutes in a motel room, taking their hands and heads, and setting fire to the room. Cottingham was finally captured in 1981 after being seen fleeing an attempted murder. Although he was only convicted of 6 Cottingham murders, he claims to have committed between 85 and 100 murders. His confirmed crimes resulted in 9 convictions and 8 confessions under non-prosecution agreements, earning him multiple life sentences in New Jersey prisons. Cottingham employed a troubling method of operation, frequently targeting individuals in the age range of adolescence to 20, particularly those involved in sex work. He approached them in bars, took drugs, and led them to remote places, usually motels, where he tied them up, gagged, tortured, and stabbed them before strangling them. Sometimes he would cut the heads and hands of his victims and dispose of them to avoid identification. Cottingham also carried trophies such as jewelry and personal objects belonging to his 4 victims. Survivors testified against him, resulting in 3 convictions. Number 7. Andrei Chikatilo. Also known as the Butcher of Rostov, he was a notorious serial killer of the former Soviet Union from 1992. He terrorized the country by sexually mutilating and murdering at least 50 women and children. In 1992, he was convicted of 52 counts of murder and sentenced to death. According to his usual method, Chikatilo would approach young fugitives and homeless children, easily trapping them. He followed them to a secluded place and then stabbed or strangled them to death, brutally mutilating their bodies. Chikatilo then revealed that the only way he could achieve sexual pleasure was by killing someone. He also attacked adult women, including prostitutes. Finally, Chikatilo confessed to everything, detailing 34 murders and admitting to 22 more. Investigators unrelated to him charged him with 53 counts of murder in 1992, and he was convicted of 52 of them 2 years later in February 1994. Chikatilo was executed for his unspeakable crimes with a single bullet to the head. Number 6. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris. Lawrence and Roy, also known as the Toolbox Killer, were 2 serial criminals and American sexual predators who committed kidnapping, sexual assault, torture, and murder of 5 teenagers. The deadly duo tortured and murdered teenage girls in Southern California for 5 months in 1979. They were called the Box Killer because they used household tools such as pliers, ice picks, and mallets, which are usually kept in a box of tools, to commit their crimes. Some of the girls were kidnapped while walking home or hitchhiking, while others were driven to the mountains in the area where they were tortured, sexually assaulted, and murdered. The men recorded some of their sessions sessions for fun. The killers were discovered after one of them informed another former inmate of his devious exploits, who in turn informed the police. Norris testified against Bittaker after pleading guilty to all charges in exchange for prosecutors not seeking the death penalty against him. He was found guilty of 5 counts of murder and 5 counts of kidnapping and sentenced to death on March 22, 1981. Number 5. Dennis Nilsen. He was a Scottish serial criminal and necrophile who committed the murders of at least 12 young people and children in London between 1978 and 1983. He was convicted of 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder and sentenced to life imprisonment on November 4, 1983. Originally, the recommendation was for a minimum of 25 years, but it was later changed to a perpetual sentence in December 1994. Nilsen was imprisoned in a maximum security prison. His crimes took place in 2 different areas of northern London, where he resided during the mentioned period. He lured his victims to his home and then strangled or drowned them. After each murder, Nilsen would bathe and dress the victim's body, keeping it for extended periods before dissecting and disposing of the remains, either by burning them or flushing them down the toilet. Nilsen became known as the killer of Maxwell Hill due to his crimes in the Moswell area of North London. He passed away on May 12, 2018 in a York hospital following a stroke, lung issues, and retroperitoneal hemorrhage, which occurred after undergoing surgical intervention for an abdominal aortic aneurysm. Number 4. Albert Fish. Born in 1870 in Washington, D.C., is still remembered for his chilling history. Fish managed to elude justice for several years, but a slip-up in the form of an anonymous letter to Grace's parents ultimately led to his capture. After his arrest, Fish confessed to multiple murders, including the killing of Francis McDonald, a 9-year-old boy who never returned home after playing ball with Fish and his friends. Fish also admitted to the murder of 4-year-old Billy through a letter to his lawyer. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by electrocution, a punishment he willingly accepted. However, his lawyer refused to read Fish's last words, handwritten notes filled with obscenities, stating that he would never show them to anyone. Fish's crimes serve as a chilling reminder of the dark and depraved nature that some human beings can reach. It is difficult not to feel fear and anxiety when discussing individuals like him. Number 3. David Parker Ray. Also known as the Toy Box Killer, kidnapped, tortured, and sexually assaulted women for years. Although never convicted of murder, his accomplices accused him of killing several women, and it is believed he may have murdered up to 60. He created a mobile torture chamber in a semi-trailer he called the Toy Box, equipped with instruments of sexual torture. He kidnapped low-level women, subjecting them to horrible sexual abuse. He had accomplices, including women he had relationships with, and even his daughter. He administered drugs to his victims to make them forget what happened before abandoning them on the side of the road. Ray had a mirror mounted on the ceiling, tied up his victims, and used wood to immobilize them while he and his dogs, and sometimes friends, took advantage of them. In 2001, the individual responsible for the heinous crimes of kidnapping and torture was found guilty and sentenced to 224 years. However, he passed away shortly after his convictions. Number 2. Jeffrey Dahmer. Also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an American sex offender and criminal who murdered and dismembered 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Dahmer's crimes were horrific and involved necrophilia, cannibalism, and the preservation of body parts. Most of his victims were killed by strangulation after being drugged with sedatives. In some cases, Dahmer also attempted to induce a submissive state in his victims by injecting them with hydrochloric acid or boiling water into their frontal lobes. Dahmer had a strange fascination with dead animals from a young age, as he witnessed his father removing bones from animals beneath their house when he was 4 years old. This intrigue and obsession with animal bones continued to grow, and he referred to them as his sticks or violin. Despite being diagnosed with multiple personality disorders, he received 15 life sentences for crimes in Wisconsin and life imprisonment for a 1994 Ohio homicide. Number 1. Criminal Louis Garavito. Also known as the Beast or Goofy, confessed to sexually assaulting, torturing and murdering between 100 and 400 minors in Colombia. His crimes spanned from 1980 to 1999, and he recruited children from humble backgrounds, deceiving them with gifts before subjecting them to prolonged periods of abuse. Garavito was arrested in 1999 and eventually sentenced to 1853 years and 9 days in jail for his crimes. His confirmed number of murder victims stands at least 193, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to follow for more crime stories.